This is a conspiracy.
Rudy's Revelation.
Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, August 14th. Welcome to the podcast. So today we got some breaking news about Medicare and the inflation rate. So let's get into the headlines for today, Wednesday, August 14th. First, we have from Fox News here, Biden-Harris administration using taxpayer money to mask Medicare premium hikes before election. Says critics, the program is in a death spiral. Former domestic policy advisor to former President Trump said. The article goes on to say, under the Inflation Reduction Act, which was intended to cap out-of-pocket drug costs for Medicare beneficiaries, insurers are poised to significantly hike monthly premiums, with average bids for Part D plans expected to triple by next year. In response to potential voter backlash, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the CMS, rolled out a 3-year demonstration project to subsidize these premiums, aiming to keep them at artificially low. However, despite these appearance of relief, some critics are saying that taxpayers will fund a dramatic increase in the subsidies from $30 per recipient per month in 2024 to $142 in 2025, raising concerns about the long-term impact on government spending and debt. Indeed. So we're going to move on to some other headlines here. Economic headlines. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Inflation slipped to 2.9 in July, lower than expected. As I featured yesterday, the first release said the inflation was reduced by 0.1%, 0.1%. And so now instead of 3, it's at 2.9. But this is still an increase of 2.9 over last year. So your value, the value of your dollar, I should say, is 2.9% less over this time last year. The consumer price index rose from 2.9 from earlier this year, from the Labor Department said Wednesday. Core prices, which exclude volatile food and energy items, which is most of people's expenses, climbed to 3.2% over the previous 12 months and 0.2% since June. So there you go. It's 3.2 over the past 12 months, but since last June, and that's July numbers, it only climbed 0.2%. So what does this mean generally? This is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Gross domestic product, this is an advanced prediction, is at 2.8. So inflation is still 0.1% higher than the GDP, which the GDP, what it does is it hedges the effects of inflation. So if your GDP is low and your inflation is high, that is the worst. If they're somewhat in equilibrium, that's better for the overall economy, not necessarily better for your pocket, because that doesn't mean your wage is climbing at the pace of inflation. Most people used to get cost of living increases, which keeps you, 3% a year, which keeps you basically at the same level as inflation. Inflation was rising under Trump about 2%. The average is about 3%. Anything over that is substantially risky, particularly how it compares with the GDP. All right, enough of that. More headlines here. New York Post, Kamala Harris campaign team is editing new headlines in her favor without outlets' knowledge, or is it with the knowledge of the outlets? Basically, she's taking headlines, she's making them better, and then they're putting it out in an advertisement. It's basically an editorial, which ads that seem like they're news stories but really aren't. So basically, they're trying to dupe the novice newsreader to thinking those are actually headlines. We're going to move on over to the Federalist at this point here. The press don't discuss real campaign issues because they don't want Trump to win. And this is an article by Mark Hemingway. The press is hoping you won't notice they're covering for Kamala Harris by not covering her record on real issues such as inflation, immigration, education, crime, taxes, and so on. Article goes on to say, Kamala Harris could not survive the scrutiny of a real presidential campaign, and the media knows this. They figure they can skate by with 3 months of embarrassingly puffy coverage of fool just enough voters with the talk of vibes and joyful campaigning, because vibes are all the Harris campaign has. The Harris-Walsh record is indefensible. There's a reason for their website has 7 donation buttons, but no web page dedicated to the issues. Again, it is worth noting just how crazy and disturbing recent events have been. Joe Biden has dropped out of the race. Kamala Harris has become the Democratic nominee for president just a week ago through an unprecedented and dubious roll call of delegates on the internet without Harris receiving a single primary vote, and even more incredibly, without answering a single substantive question for a member of the press. Indeed. That's the problem with what's going on here. And as I said last night in another edition of Tuesdays with Perry, episode 87, you should check it out. We talked about this briefly, that's saying that the thing with Kamala Harris and the press is that the reason she's not appearing in front of the press is because they're buoyant, just doing their little rallies and stuff like that, and not having to answer any substantive questions. But also, particularly, they don't want to be asked, Kamala Harris doesn't want to be asked about the cognitive decline of Joe Biden and his stepping away from the 2024 ticket, what she knew about either of these issues, if at all. And of course she did, because she said, Joe Biden and I had lunch every Wednesday. So she must have known about his cognitive decline, and that's really what she doesn't want to answer to. So she did have one press gaggle on the tarmac right after Trump had called an impromptu press conference where he answered over a dozen questions, but she had just a few of her favorite press people there that asked her softball questions, and certainly didn't ask her at all about Joe Biden's cognitive health and what she knew about it and when, and whether she knew anything about the pressure being brought against President Joe Biden to step away from the ticket, even though he received millions of primary votes and raised millions of dollars, and somehow that's all supposed to move over to Kamala Harris. Not likely. The Federalist also reports tracking Kamala Harris's biggest and baddest lies, 20 and counting. I'm just going to go over these really quickly. Trump will weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies, she said behind the vice presidential podium. He will round up peaceful protesters and throw them out of the country and even terminate the United States Constitution. We know that's not true. Number 19, Harris lies about Trump, GOP abortion platform. Donald Trump would ban abortion nationwide. That's not true. Harris fracking flip-flop. You know about this, is that she said she would ban fracking, and now she says she won't. Number 17, Harris team falsely claims J.D. Vance endorsed Project 2025, which he didn't. Harris denies Biden's obvious decline. Now, this is what I just said. This is the most important thing here, is that she is not answering about what she knew and when about Biden's cognitive health. She must have known something before the debate. Joe Biden is saying, oh, he was just sick on that day. We know, even with the Sunday morning interview of Joe Biden, we know that he still can't cobble together a few sentences without trailing off. She must have known this. She supposedly had lunch with him every Wednesday. She knows about the plan to stab him in the back and take over. I'll tell you, the article goes on to say, I'll tell you the reality of it is I've spent a lot of time with Joe Biden, be it in the Oval Office, the Situation Room, and other places. He's extraordinarily smart. He has the ability to see around the corner in terms of what might be in the challenges we face as a nation or globally. So they say. Number 15, Harris accuses Trump of trying to cut Medicare, Social Security. That's not true. And actually, as I just noted, the Inflation Reduction Act is actually causing rates to rise within Medicare, particularly on the prescription drug benefits. They say they're going to keep low, even though they're using your own tax dollars to do that. Harris repeats book ban falsehoods. Trump and the Republicans want to ban books, even though what we know about that is those are sexually explicit and revisionist history. Number 13, Harris allies lie about her border czar appointment. She didn't accept the title border czar, and she demurred on what her responsibilities were. We weren't really sure what it was, but she was supposed to be in charge, and she didn't do anything except go to a couple Central American countries and talk. Harris wrongfully asserts NCAA women's bracket were banned until 2022. Not true. Number 11, Harris repeatedly lies about Georgia voting law. And Georgia extremists passed a law to make it even illegal to give people food and water for standing in line to exercise their civic right and to vote. That's not true. Number 10, Harris falsely blames Republicans for Wisconsin abortion limit. That was already an 1849 law that was already on the books. So when it went back to the states, that law automatically took effect. It had nothing to do with Republicans. Harris fibs about Florida's history curriculum. Again, this is the same thing about saying that enslaved people benefited from slavery. And the actual thing in the curriculum just said that slaves went on to use some of the skills they learned while a slave to become professionals. Not that that was necessarily worth noting at all. It really wasn't. It backfired. Number 8, worst VP in history claims great approval ratings, which she never had. Harris lies about bailing out violent criminals, which she did. And the WCCO. Number 6, Harris claims spending sprees won't raise taxes. That's not true, and it also raised inflation. Number 5, Harris repeats election security falsehood. Across our nation, she lamented anti-voter laws could make it more difficult for as many as 55 million Americans to vote. That's not true at all. You could go into any polling place and vote. Some people haven't been able to vote because apparently somebody voted in their stead. That happened not only in the last election in 2022, but also in 2020. Harris knowingly spread a border patrol whipping lie. That was the picture that seemed to show Border Patrol people on horseback whipping migrants. That wasn't the thing at all. That had nothing to do with what was going on. Obviously, the guy was whipping his horse, not the migrants. Number 3, Harris says almost impossible for rural Americans to photocopy. That's not true either. I'm just looking at some information here about something that went on with the shooting of President Trump. Harris packages. Number 2, Harris packages what appears to be her be a popular MLK story as her own. Yeah, freedom. That was the, I said freedom. Number 1, Harris claims Jussie Smollett's race hoax was a lynching. Obviously not true. So a lot of this stuff, she always lies, but she can't really speak in front of reporters, so she can't keep track of her lies. She doesn't know anything about the issues. She can't articulate policy positions, and she really can't speak. She doesn't have much of an intellect at all. We're going to move on to her running mate, though. Fox News, former Minnesota resident unloads on Governor Walz about mother died of loneliness during pandemic. Former Minnesota resident rips ultimate liberal. Governor Tim Walz says he wants to control everything. Well, that's true. There have been a bunch of reports, especially on Fox, about Minnesota residents lamenting about what happened during the pandemic, where Governor Walz issued executive orders that were draconian in nature. There were people that were on their front porch that were shot by police with rubber bullets. And there's more to talk about as far as Tim Walz goes. Muslim cleric who praised Adolf Hitler Hamas spoke at Harris running mate Tim Walz's 2019 inauguration for governor. The imam has shared official Hamas press releases and a link to a pro-Hitler film on social media. More on Tim Walz, ex-federal prosecutor who charged George Floyd rioters, rips radical Governor Walz for letting our city burn. Joe Tarib is running for Congress against Dem Rep Angie Craig, and he was a prosecutor in Minnesota during the riots where he helped incarcerate people that were let out of jail by Kamala Harris. Moving along to headlines here from One America News. Possible conflict of interest in first presidential debate hosted by ABC News. And this is why we know that Kamala Harris has only agreed to the ABC debate. Why? We're going to get to that right now. Daniel Walden, the co-chair of Disney, which is the parent company of ABC News, is a long-term donor to Democrat candidate Kamala Harris, dating back to financially supporting Harris when she first ran for district attorney in San Francisco and California. Harris also previously admitted that her and Walden are extraordinary friends. In 2023, Walden reportedly donated $20,000 to Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. So indeed, this is a conflict of interest, but we also know that ABC plans to be favorable to Harris, and that's why she's only agreeing to that debate. Who knows what the rules are going to be in that debate? She should really agree to all the debates that Trump proposed, and Trump proposed obviously having the first debate with Fox, so he would get a leg up on Kamala Harris, because the other two, the NBC and ABC, would both be very supportive of Kamala Harris in a way that we didn't see CNN support Joe Biden. So, which just leads us to believe there was a conspiracy there to out Joe Biden, get him off the presidential ticket. So they didn't give him his vitamin B shot, or they gave him a placebo. Then they sent him out there with no teleprompter, no notes. And CNN let Joe Biden be ravaged. So another Fox News article here, Trump campaign picks up the pace, eyes counter-programming during Democrats' convention. Trump's campaign tells Fox News it plans to counter-program the Democratic National Convention, which kicks off Monday in Chicago. I hope that's the case. I hope Trump does something, maybe with Elon Musk again. That was very popular. Apparently 50 million people tried to log into that Spaces on X with Donald Trump, and only 1.2 million got on. Not to mention, I think there was a hack going on there. For some reason, Trump sounded like he was slurring. That seems like it was manipulated. I haven't seen him since. Maybe he had dental surgery. I don't know what the hell was going on there. But we'll see next time Trump speaks, whether he's lisping or not, or, I doubt that that's a permanent affectation, or that it sounds like a microphone, or somehow the feed was hacked, maybe by somebody within X. It's hard to know. The X did receive a DDoS attack, supposedly, presumably admitted by Elon Musk. Trump is under attack. I mean, there's no way without it. I'm always for the underdog. So if somebody's being attacked by the system I loathe, then the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I never professed much love for Trump. I like his policies. I like the America First policy. I like an economic nationalist policy. I like to defend the nation of America. And Trump is right in a lot of what he says about America's giving the farm away. And that's not fair to the citizens. So we're going to move on with more Trump news from Fox. Trump push to dismantle education department met with enthusiasm in the House GOP. Republican Thomas Massie has led the push to dissolve the Department of Education. Well, it's true, because all it does is it takes a lion's share of federal taxes as far as the domestic departments go. There is a point to the Department of Education, and that is to provide poor inner cities with funding they otherwise wouldn't get because of their tax revenue. But funding of schools is really a state responsibility. So the states have to figure out how to fund their own schools. It's really not the federal responsibility. My tax dollars from Connecticut shouldn't be funding schooling in rural Kentucky. It really should be going to the state I live in. So if they dissolve the Department of Education, there'll be no love lost here. Moving on to the Federalist, Alabama Secretary of State finds 3,000 potential non-citizens registered to vote. Well, how is that possible? I thought none of these claims that the Republicans made during the 2020 election actually existed. Are non-citizens registered to vote? Of course they are. Do the Democrats support registering them to vote, particularly progressives? Of course they do. It's the win at any cost. One American News, J6 praying grandma ordered to pay a $100,000 fine, endure 6 months of house arrest, so she doesn't have to go to prison. But what did she do? Prosecutors claim that this woman, Lav Renz, spent roughly 10 minutes inside the Capitol building chanting, "It's our house. You can't take our house." So that's simple trespass. She was there for 10 minutes. She left voluntarily when asked to leave. How does she receive that sort of fine? What was a $100,000 fine and 12 months of house arrest for simple trespass? This is what Perry and I also discussed last night on our latest episode of Tuesdays with Perry, episode 87, so you should check it out. We discussed this at length, that how somebody who's arrested for simple trespass, I don't care where it was, in the federal government building or it doesn't matter where, but simply trespass, was asked to leave. And obviously she says, "It's our house, you can't take our house." So certainly she was under the impression that she had the right to be there, and then more than likely left when she was asked to leave. So she wasn't arrested on premise, she was arrested later. How could she receive a $100,000 fine for simple trespass? It's unspeakable. That is cruel and unusual punishment. I hope she appeals. It says she reached a plea deal, so you can't really appeal a plea deal. Ridiculous that the federal government, and I made this equation earlier, comparing what's happening under Maduro, the authoritarian government of Venezuela, the communist government there, against the people that resisted the claims that Maduro won in the election. They thought it was unfair, and that those people are being persecuted, much like the January 6th protesters were being persecuted by the federal government, particularly after Joe Biden took office and Merrick Garland took over the DOJ. More news from the DOJ, though, and this is strange. DOJ admits Biden corruption, government to prove multi-million-dollar foreign influence peddling scheme. This is from the Washington Times. At least there's no longer any doubt about it. President Biden was selling out this country for his family's profit. Now that Mr. Biden is a lame dunk, a presidential torch has been passed via Democratic Zoom call to Kamala Harris. The Justice Department felt free to come clean, almost. In papers filed with the federal court last week, special counsel David Weiss informed the judge he would explain how Hunter Biden collected $1 million in cash from a wealthy Romanian businessman, Gabriel Popovu, who wanted U.S. officials to strong-arm Romanian regulators into dropping a criminal probe. Romanian is also corrupt. It's a lot of the Slavic countries, they look at corruption and bribery as just part of life there. They don't see it as a moral failing, as I often say. The article goes on to say the government will introduce evidence described above, including that Hunter Biden and business associate one received compensation from a foreign principal who was attempting to influence U.S. policy and public opinion and caused the United States to investigate the Romanian investigation of GP in Romania, Weiss wrote. So they're bringing corruption charges against the Biden family. That's interesting. More economic news. CNN, Home Depot issues warning about economy. Home Depot says consumers are feeling crummy about the economy and they're dishing out less on major home renovation projects. The home improvement giant, a bellwether of consumer spending in the housing market, lowered its sales expectations for the year. It said customers were spending less on home improvement projects. Pressured by high interest rates and concerns that the economy is getting worse, which it is, even though the inflation has ticked lower. You want to know why it's ticked lower? Is because going into the election year, the Biden has increased oil production and hasn't put forth any more large spending bills. More signs the economy is going south. Paramount to lay off 15% of workforce. If you didn't know, a lot of this is driven by AI. As I said, AI is a human displacement, human employment displacement, job displacement. But also this is a sign that the economy is getting worse. Again, moving into the future, Semaphore is reporting U.S. campuses brace for renewed pro-Palestinian protests. What's going on here is that the sentiment, online chatter, and the protests involving pro-Palestinian protests, anti-Zionist Jewish protests are going to return, providing there's no ceasefire or progress in the war in Gaza, that there will be renewed protests on college campuses this fall. My thing is that we see footage of Israeli soldiers shooting. We see bombed out buildings and cities. But we're like 5 months into this thing. Are there that many Hamas fighters in Gaza that are holding up the Israeli advance that much? They're supposed to be what? I don't know, 10,000? An army of 10,000 can't be eliminated by a professional army with the support of the United States in less than 5 months? I know they said, they have the tunnel network and they're hostages and all these things. The whole thing seems contrived to me. I'm sorry. I don't know the purpose or exactly the methodology behind this, but this whole thing seems contrived for a variety of reasons. I'm not getting into it. The biggest one is to open up a war against Iran, obviously. Again, not only to trick Russia into attacking either with their nuclear capability or against NATO in some way to cause a wider war, they're poking the bear there, but also they're using the Palestinian conflict to try to incite Iran into attacking. So far, thankfully, Iran has not attacked, and I don't think they should because they're going to open up a war, a larger war. And that's what we don't want. We don't want war, and that's one of the reasons we vote for Trump also. All right, Reuters, Trump loses third bid for judge to step aside in hush money case. If you didn't know, a New York judge on his own accord declined for the third time to step aside from the case in which Donald Trump was convicted of charges involving hush money paid to a porn star. Because Reuters, it's not a hush money case. It is a campaign finance case, dismissing the former U.S. president's claim of conflict of interest related to the political consultancy work by the judge's daughter. So, of course, if it's up to the judge to step aside, he's not going to step aside. So his daughter runs a campaign advocacy group that did work for President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And somehow that's not a conflict of interest. She got paid millions of dollars for her work for the Democratic Party, and Judge Mershon also previously had donated to the Democratic Party and to Joe Biden's campaign. How is not that a conflict of interest? But if you leave it to the FBI to investigate the FBI, like Judge Mershon, if you leave it up to him, of course he's going to rule the way he did. We really need some sort of arbiter involved here to decide whether or not there's a conflict of interest. You can't, if you catch some, and the gaslighting from the left is just mind-boggling at this point. You can't ask somebody, do you think you should, if you were caught with your hand in the cookie jar, do you think you should be punished for stealing cookies? No, I don't. And not only that, I didn't steal any cookies. If you leave it up to the person who's accused, what do you think they're going to say? Right, more news. Associated Press, Wyoming reporter caught using artificial intelligence to create fake quotes and stories. As I mentioned before with the Paramount story, artificial intelligence is taking over human jobs. And whether they're used for propaganda or for lying or for making up quotes, for making up sources, how are you going to tell? The only way is to back check stories. And that's probably how this guy got caught. Reporters lie and make up fake quotes and stories all the time. That's not anything new, but the fact is that he used artificial intelligence to lie. That is new. Artificial intelligence didn't refuse to lie, that sort of thing. But people lie all the time. That's why when you do a story, you can't use anonymous sources because everything needs to be back checked by the citizenry, by the reader, by the consumer, the end user, or other journalists. So you know, if you don't have an anonymous source, let's say we're talking about the Trump shooter went to a range and the range owner said X, you should be able to trot on over to that range, that gun range, ask the owner the same question. I have a report here from the Washington Post that said you witnessed this guy training at the range 12 or 20 or whatever, 40 times. Is that true? And they would answer accordingly. Oh, no, I never spoke to the Post. No, that's not true. They made that stuff up. And that's the point. It's just like with voting, is everything needs to be back checked. You don't just leave it up to the source and go, oh, I mean, I do, in my reporting as well, you sort this, you cite the source. This is what they say. Is it true? Is it not true? You'll just have to go with what they say. That's why I cite the sources, what the headline is. All right, just quickly before we back out here, BBC is reporting on, and I have a couple charts here, on some maps that show the Russian-held territories, Russian advances that were pushed back. But this is the point, is the Ukrainian invasion of Russia in 3 different areas. But where is it? It's far north of Kharkiv. So it's far north of where all the activity is on the front, where all the Russian troops are in Crimea and in the Donetsk. Okay? So they go even further north and they attack Russia where there's no Russian defenses. So that's why they make it seem like they broke through Russian lines. There were no Russians there. And they didn't take over anything of interest. The Ukrainians just invaded a part. It was like a morale boost coup. Look, we invaded Russia. Okay, they invaded part of Russia. Didn't have anything there. They said they destroyed an airfield. Was it an airfield that was used for combat? I doubt very much the Russians would have fighter jets or military planes stationed that close to the border, particularly with the rockets Ukraine has now. Okay, so it's half an hour. So we're getting back into sort of the time frame I wanted to be in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, share the podcast most of all. So appreciate you joining me today. So we went over a few things today. Vapid Kamala Harris, she's an empty suit. Her platform is being obfuscated by the mainstream media on purpose, thinking you're an idiot, you're an uninformed voter, and you're just going to go by what you feel. Don't forget, you can't let emotion dictate your decisions. Don't make decisions on your emotions. Measure your emotional impulse using your intellect. And her vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, is an authoritarian and a socialist authoritarian. So, as I said, please follow and share the podcast. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to reinstate what I was trying to do before, a better format with less bloviating on my part, more headlines, and try to make these a little bit shorter. So stay hip to the trick. And remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically. Join me every day live, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on Rumble. We'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
You can't handle the truth.
The New World Order.